Hello, Tummy and Coos fans. It's me, Candace, here back with you for an author event that I'm really excited about. We, of course, have been celebrating Pride Month this month, and today we have a really great author event with Alex Sanchez and Robert Fieseler. So let's get going with that. They're going to be in conversation. And Alex, this is in partnership with DC Comics as well. So this is for Alex's new book. It is a graphic novel called You Brought Me the Ocean, and it's beautiful. So definitely check that out. Alex has published 8 novels, including the American Library Association's Best Book for Young Adults, Rainbow Boys, which I know a lot of you have read. And he also wrote the Lambda Award winning So Hard to Say. His novel Bait won the Tomas Rivera Mexican American Book Award and the Florida Book Award Gold Medal for Young Adult Fiction. He has a master's degree in guidance and counseling and has worked for many years as a youth and family counselor. And I'm really excited to have Alex with us. And Robert, a lot of you may know because he is local and wrote a book called TINDERBOX, which won the Edgar Award, the Louisiana Literary Award, and Lambda Literary's Judith Markowitz Award for Emerging Writers. And he's usually around Tennessee Williams and Saints and Sinners. And I know a lot of you go to those things as well. So I'm sure that even if you don't know his name, you may know his face. So welcome, Alex and Robert. Thank y'all so much for being here.
Hi, wow. What a wonderful introduction.
Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Y'all do the work by being interesting. So that's good enough for me. So I'm going to let y'all go ahead and have your discussion.
Sure. All right. So Alex, DC shared the graphic novel with me. You Brought Me the Ocean, which made me feel so cool. And I read this thing and I was laughing and I was crying at different points. And I felt like I was like living what was my adolescent coming out or queer experience, but through the lens of the character Jake, who would eventually become Aqualad, right? But doesn't really in the graphic novel. So I have so many questions for you that I just want to shoot you, if that's okay.
Great, sounds awesome.
So tell me a little bit about why you wrote You Brought Me the Ocean.
Well, actually, DC Comics reached out to me, and I got this email out of the blue, and I was like, is this a joke? Is this a trick? And it wasn't. And what happened was that they have this character, Aqualad, who a lot of you, I'm sure you already know. And DC is starting a new line of graphic novels. And graphic novels, as you probably know, is bigger than a comic book. It's usually about 150 to 200 pages. So it's a fuller story. And they are rolling out a new line of graphic novels, some of them targeted towards young adults, some of them toward middle grade. And what they want to do is tell stories that aren't just about, superheroes beating up supervillains, that they're more, showing, the superheroes as teenagers and facing real life teenage issues. And so for the character Aqualad, what they wanted to do is a couple of versions back of Aqualad, he had identified as gay. And so they wanted to explore that story more, explore the story of his sexuality, just as so many teens growing up nowadays are dealing with, sexuality, their gender identity. And so in terms of real life teen issues, to show a character who happens to be a superhero dealing with that. So we had a conversation and they asked me to do a pitch for the story. And so I went to the internet and found out, well, what's a pitch? And basically they wanted just a one paragraph of what was my concept of what his story would be. And so I did a little bit of research on the internet for previous versions of Aqualad, but they emphasize for this story, really make the story your own. Don't worry too much about the specifics of the previous characters, just really make it your own. And focus on the emotional core of the story. And so that gave me a lot of leeway. And I started putting together ideas of what the story might be. And, as you said, when you first started, that it took you back to your, youth and coming out and growing up. That's where I went. I went back to, well, what was it like for me to be growing up and sorting through my sexuality. And so that's how this story came together.
Wow, it's magical. I just, all of us hope that we write enough brilliant novels that someday DC Comics emails us. Wow.
Well, that's what happened was that when they had this idea of that idea of what would be the story, and so they wanted to focus on a gay character and his sexuality, and so they started asking around, well, who would be a good writer for this? And my name came up, and so, as you're saying, it's the result of those previous books.
Oh yes. Okay, so within the book itself, and I kept thinking about this too, because I was thinking about when I was starting to recognize what I was as a queer closeted teenager, the role that comic books and the way that the role that, and I don't know if I should talk about it, but the role that the mutant universe and the Marvel series influenced me, where Wolverine's origin story became like this, in the way that he was sort of pumped full of metal, but he could heal and things like that, became a sort of analogy for me, and a sort of power totem that I hung on to for about of what it would mean when I came out and embraced my specialness. And I was wondering if you would think about, what is it about the notion of powers that fits so perfectly into narratives of coming out, right, and recognizing one's queerness?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, because when I started working with the story, I started thinking about, how superheroes, there's such a wonderful metaphor for being queer in lots of different levels, lots of different ways. In the sense that, when we're growing up, we're different, but we're not quite sure, slowly we come to terms of, well, how are we different? What is our queerness? And the sense that, so oftentimes we're living double lives, because as we start to understand who we are, it may not be safe, or it may feel too risky to tell other people. So we have these double lives and these secret identity. And I just found that, all of that just worked so well as, the metaphor of superheroes for being queer. And then, as you point out, then the coming out of that and the ownership of that, when we can truly be who we are in all our fullness and all our integrity, incorporating all those different parts of ourselves, then we do become so much more powerful, because we're expressing who we are as unique, special beings. And that our queerness, in that sense, is such a gift. It's part of what makes us special. And when we can own that, then that unleashes so much energy, so much power within us. And so it's interesting in this story with Aqualad, I don't think it's giving too much away to say, is, his superpowers are with water. And as he starts, he goes on this dual journey where he starts understanding who he is in terms of his sexuality, at the same time that he starts understanding that he has these special powers over water.
Yeah. You thread the needle really well with how Jake, or Aqualad, acquires his powers, so that his powers and his queerness seem to be developing at the same time and rate. And then they also feel innate to him biologically, right? Like not chosen. They're happening to him, ready or not. And so I was kind of wondering, how did you decide on that aspect of his origin story?
Well, when I write a book, it's a long process. And so oftentimes, it's like, sometimes I'll have conscious ideas and sometimes they're unconscious ideas. So it's hard to go back and figure out, okay, at what moment did this particular thread, come in? Where exactly did that idea come from? Or how did that end up, working together in sync? Because a lot of it is just, putting the words on the page. And, we have the two sides of our brain, the right side, the more creative side, and then the left side, the more analytical side. And so what I, encourage my writing students all the time is, for that first draft, just put it on the page. Don't analyze it. Don't edit it. Just get the words out on paper. Really harness that right side. and then after that, then come back to it during revision, and then use the more analytical side. So it's really hard to tease out and remember at what point did this happen, and at what point did that happen.
Right.
A lot of it just flows organically.
Mm.
And then with DC, I just had such a wonderful editor, Sarah Miller. And part of what was different with writing the graphic novel is that it was much more collaborative in terms of working with an editor, especially because this was my first time writing a graphic novel. Mm-hmm. That she was able to point out things here and there and just gave so much creative input. So it was a wonderfully collaborative process for less times. Now it's hard to go back. Now, was that Sarah's idea or was that my idea?
Yeah. Had you planned on writing a graphic novel before at some point in your career? Because you write mostly within the YA genre. There seems to be a natural cross. You seem to be quite, you really have spread your wings in this particular work. Did you imagine this was something you'd eventually do?
Not at all. I like so many, I loved comics when I was, a boy, when I was a young person. The comics that I particularly loved weren't so much the superhero comics. There used to be this line of comics. I can't remember who the publisher was, but they were Casper the Friendly Ghost and Wendy the Good Little Witch. And what I loved about those stories is that these were identified as monsters by other people, but they were really good characters. They were good, they weren't villains. They were the good people, but other people didn't understand that, and they saw them as monsters. And looking back on it, that too was like a metaphor for being queer, where other people will look at us as bad or evil or monstrous, whereas in reality we're good. We're just like other people. Sure, we got character defects, but we're good people. And I think as a boy, I identified with that.
Yeah.
But then, and the other thing that happened was that when I was a boy, I loved to draw. My mom was a watercolor artist, so I've always loved drawing. And so, when they approached me for the graphic novel, it's like, well, I would love to do that. I'm not sure I could, but DC was wonderful about it. They were like, we're going to give you training. And again, my editor was really good, teaching me stuff that is specific to writing comics. And I went on the internet and found out, how to write a comic book script. And so it was a wonderfully energizing new process for me.
Sure.
Where I was able to learn so much. So I loved it. And I hope we can do more.
Yeah, I'm astounded that you were like learning how to fly the rocket ship as it was. I would have no idea that was the process. But really, I mean, that the work itself is just so great. I was in the foreword. You write a bit about the monster comics, Casper, right. And how they influenced you growing up. And I was curious about, in this specific work and reading it, I didn't find a ton of literal monsters in this piece, actually. Well, maybe besides Black Manta's like a moral monster, and then there's a bully character who's just a jerk. Like, he's just a jerk. But like, I was wondering for you, just from as one creative to another creative, like, what do you think are the monsters lurking in this story? Are they psychological or societal? Is it going, since you have to sort of transmute yourself back and transport yourself back into sort of a teenage mentality and go to that place? Are you finding yourself that you're facing some monsters personally that you have as an author? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think in this case, the attitude, homophobia, homophobia, transphobia, all of those, that they, like the bully character, in the story, that, he sees, queer people as freaks. And that, there's been this tremendous cultural shift, in our society today, I'm sure you heard another hallmark with the Supreme Court decision.
Oh, yeah. Massive.
Just massive, yes. Incredible cultural shift
to queer folk and trans folk in terms of employment protections. That's what even the beginning of the homophile movement in the 40s and 50s were fighting for. Recognizing in Gorsuch.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's astounding. Anyway, I continue. Sorry.
No, it's cause to celebrate, as you say. It's massive, and it's going to have repercussions. You know, not just in terms of employment, but in terms of other protections that you know, are still needed. And so, yeah, that idea that, you know, in spite of this cultural shift, that homophobia and transphobia persists, and that people, you know, there are some people, and, you know, it's changing and it'll continue to change, but there still are people who, you know, still do see, you know, as freaks and as monsters. And that's how I see that metaphor.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a little bit about Jake, the Aqualad, and the character Maria, the best friend, because I was really drawn to her. Maria is tough. She's curious. She has a terrarium when Jake has an aquarium, right? Like family-centric, but she's not a beard, right, or an accessory. She's a central part of the story. And I was wondering, I thought about this, and I was like, he must have known someone like Maria. So I was going to ask you, from where in your life did you draw Maria?
Well, you know, I am a fiction writer, and the way that works is that I take some of my own history, and then I take some of other people's history,
right,
and then I use my imagination. So in my life, there have been, you know, several instances throughout my life, you know, as a boy, as a teenager, as an adult, where, you know, there were women in my life through which, you know, I helped me sort out who I was, you know, through those relationships. And so again, with DC, you know, encouraging me to really focus on the emotional core of the story, that it's much more complicated than her just being a beard.
Sure.
That it goes beyond that. So that's part of what was wonderful about, you know, having roughly 200-page graphic novel as opposed to a 20-page comic book, is that you can explore so much emotional depth in terms of the characters.
Sure.
And as much as I love superheroes, it's like that's what I'm always hungry for.
Right.
Yeah, but what's the substance? You know, what really makes them people?
You're gonna laugh, but like I didn't know Jake is Aqualad. I read this just presuming that this was a coming of age book about this really fascinating character, and like I'm not schooled in this universe, so I'm coming at it fresh. And I thought that the emotional depth was so profound. I found myself wondering until I Googled, I wonder what happens to Jake after this story.
Well, hopefully many more people will wonder, and there will be a sequel, maybe even a series. Who knows?
Oh, sure. Okay, so I wanted to ask a little bit about representation, because this is something that is, well, I mean, it's a really of the moment topic. It should have been always of the moment, but unfortunately not. Where within the queer alliance, right? I will note, and this shouldn't be controversial to say, but a lot of the gay Barbies are cisgender gay white males who went to Harvard, people who look and talk like Pete Buttigieg, take up a lot of oxygen, and we get a lot of space and representation in terms of the expectation of when they talk about queer folk or gay folk in this country, the image of Pete Buttigieg or of someone that looks like me, unfortunately, is the default. And I was wondering, it felt like in this piece, you guys worked really hard to include people of various races and cultures, and to make it queer representation reflective of the great diversity of our Rainbow Alliance. And I was curious about the conversations that went in behind that, or personal feelings you had that allowed that execution to take place.
Sure. Well, you know, one of the things I love about working with DC is that they're all about inclusion and all about diversity. So it was never an issue. I just wrote the characters that way, and they just accepted them that way. And there wasn't any issue in terms of that. In my previous books as well, Diversity has always been a focus for me. And so I've always tried to include the diversity of characters in all of my work. So it wasn't something new to me. What was very interesting here that I hadn't expected, because it is a graphic novel, there doesn't need to be a point made of the character's race or ethnicity. We see the characters.
Mm.
And so I thought that was something really fun, that then in terms of graphic novels, it really lends itself to that, because you don't have to state a character's race or ethnicity. The audience will see them.
Mm. Yeah. Focusing on the medium, I had a question too about that, because I guess I'm just curious about this whole thing. But like,
Right.
I'm curious about multimodal composing, which is what you did, and like what it's like to team with a legendary artist who does something in the piece that's as important as your work, that creates a cohesive whole. And you achieve a sort of mind meld here, don't you, with like the artist, I think, where it's quite astounding what you're both able to achieve. And what was it like working with this was the creator of Blue is the graphic novel, Blue is the Warmest Color, right? Julie, and I don't want to mispronounce her last name. Can you tell me how to pronounce it?
I pronounce it Marot.
Marot. What was it like teaming up with this fantastic artist?
Well, they are fantastic. And when I first heard that it would be her nickname Jewel would be Jewel, that I was like, really? Oh my gosh. And it was a little intimidating, because as you say, they are just, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of your question about collaborating,
Yeah.
and the way it worked was that so I'm in Rochester, New York. Sarah, the editor, is in
like the home of Kodak, right? And
right?
the home of Kodak and optics,
Right.
and all that. That's where you're at. Oh, okay.
That's where I am. And then our editor Sarah is in LA with that's where DC Comics is based. And then Jewel is French, but is living in Bologna, Italy. And so it was all over the internet and Skype and emails and drop boxes and everything else. So that was one aspect of it that was fun. And then very different from writing a text, pure text manuscript. Usually when I write a novel, it's like I write the whole thing, I turn it into the editor gives me notes, I do another draft, turn it in, the editor gives me notes. And this was very different in that I start out with that initial 1-paragraph pitch,
Mm-hmm.
and then I develop that into a 12-page synopsis. And then from that 12-page synopsis, then the editor and I start breaking it down into a script. And so that whole process was new to me. And every page of a comic, in this case, averaged about 4 to 6 panels.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 1-pagers are called splashes, and the 2-pagers are called spreads. And learning all this technical vocabulary and page turns. About one thing that you can do differently from a standard text novel is that the way you arrange the story in terms of panels, and at the bottom of the page you always want to have a hook that either leads to the next page at the top, or that prompts the reader to turn the page.
Really?
And so you can play it. Usually with a text novel, you have no idea how it's going to be laid out by the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, exactly, because of the script. And so working that. And so the editor and I worked on the first chunk, the first act, the first 25%. And then once that was done, then we sent that to Jewel, and Jewel started doing the illustrations for that. And I'm like, but wait a minute, what if things change as we go along? And Sarah was like, don't worry about it. It's all going to work out. And so really, challenged my control issues. Part of what I like about being a novelist is I'm pretty much in control.
Right.
In this case, it was a lot of just letting go and trusting that this will all work out as it went along. And so when Jewel came back with, the first sketches of Jake and Maria and Kenny, it was like, oh, well, that's not exactly how I pictured them, but yeah, yeah, I like that. Because usually it's like when I'm writing something, unless I'm working from a specific photograph, it's like I just have this vague idea of what the character looks like. But to actually see a character brought to life, it was just such an exciting process to see someone else interpret the character. And it's like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Did it help? Did it change the character for you when you saw the character fully visualized? Did it affect the piece in the end at all?
Well, part of what I loved about it, it didn't so much affect it in that sense, but I found my feelings, my feelings towards the characters, because part of Jewel's talent is that they just do illustrations that just have so much emotion. The characters, just their expressiveness. And one thing, I'd learned long ago is, when I'm writing, I always work on, what is the character thinking in this moment? What are they feeling? How are they showing it? And boy, that really paid off in terms of a graphic novel, in terms of every frame. What are they thinking? What is each character thinking, feeling? How do they show it? And so that allowed me then to be thinking of lots of actions, which then Jewel just had a wonderful time with in terms of being able to show these characters in motion.
How long does this whole process take? Like with everyone working around the world on this, what is the timeline for something?
It's about, I'd say it's probably about 2 years. 2 years. Yeah.
Wow.
And the hardest part was for Jewel. I mean, they had to be cranking out, 5 pages a week, and each page with, an average of, 4 to 6 panels. I don't know how they did it. I'm just in awe.
Yeah. Okay. Within the text, so I hope this isn't a spoiler for people, but so I'm not going to give away big secrets, but I wanted to ask you about this because, well, it's just something that piques my interest. So Jake, the character, future Aqualad, and his love interest Kenny hook up, and it's very cute and beautiful. And I was wondering, how does one go about writing a queer love scene for YA in a graphic novel, without like going to jail or getting into trouble or something like that? Like, what are the guideposts when you're putting together a scene where characters are developing with each other emotionally?
Well, it goes back to, drawing upon my own experience. And part of what I think is true for most teenagers is that sense of desire and awkwardness. I really, in this case, I really want him. I really like him. I have all these feelings towards him. But what does he think about me? And what if, I do something and then he doesn't like me for it and he rejects me for it, and then, I'm going to be crushed, and just all that tentative, awkwardness. And so this, reaching out at the same time, pulling back, reaching out, pulling back, holding. And Jewel, I think, just captured that so beautifully with their illustrations. So I tried to capture it in the writing, and then remembering back to what it was like, for me, with those fresh first brushes.
Yeah.
And I think they captured it, in terms of the characters.
Yeah, I mean, you're presenting it very innocently. It's a very natural progression between the two characters, right? And I just keep thinking about how maybe just even a decade ago, this would have been controversial that you included it in a graphic novel.
Yeah. Well, part of the cultural shift, has been, as the result of, so many girl champions. And so many of the gay straight alliances are driven by straight teenage girls who have friends or relatives, and so Sarah all the time is like, we got to have lots of smooching. I want lots of smooching. I'm like, okay. And so, yeah, I think part of what DC wants to do with these graphic novels is reach a broader audience
Mhm.
from the traditional comic book audience. And so, readers like you who were reading this story without realizing that it was superhero Aqualad, that
Mhm.
a lot of readers, both male, female, non-binary, will be reading it just as this love story. Hell yeah, and one of the characters happens to be a superhero.
Well, that's a wonderful dimension to it. And it's great that you were able to devote that space to it, to make it so substantive. I don't know, kudos to that. So I had a question. So this is about your oeuvre, your broader body of work. Like, this is a story about the formation of a young person who's taking steps towards becoming a superhero and also becoming an out queer person. Like in the Rainbow Boys trilogy, you also write about the queer coming of age. What is it about, as an artistic space, about the act of becoming, that excites you as a writer? Because you certainly seem to gravitate towards it.
In terms of becoming,
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I had never thought of it that way. But what I have found is, when I first wrote Rainbow Boys, I hadn't written it as a YA novel. I was just writing this story that was in my heart. And it was actually my agent, wonderful agent Miriam Altschuler, who said, I think this would be great for teens, and I'd like to take this to the YA publishing houses. And so that's how it ended up there. And then I found that, I kept writing YA and middle grade, not so much because, that was a particular niche that I was attracted to, but just that I found that's where my voice is. We talk about an author's voice, those are the stories that I feel compelled to write about. And I think for me, going back to when I was a teen, I was so confused, not just in terms of my sexuality, but who I was, and as an immigrant, really sorting out my identity. And so those are the stories. I think the pain and hurt that I've experienced around those things, that they sort of get frozen up inside. And now my inner teen, says, I still have more to say about this. I still want to talk about this, And so this is my way of expressing it. And so the becoming, it's sort of, I guess that's sort of my approach in general toward life, is a constant becoming, being a work in progress. I don't see myself or, ever having, reached that, okay, I'm done. Until I die, it's like I'm not done yet. It's like, hopefully I'll continue to grow and become.
Yeah. When you were a young writer, or even as a teen sorting yourself out, were there any books or artworks that you were particularly inspired by, that you don't think a lot of people might not know a lot about?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I had really no access or images of LGBTQ people. Certainly not positive ones. There were the sort of stereotype, negative portrayals of gay men and lesbians, which did not make me want to be that. And that was part of the challenge for me, is not being able to identify with that, and certainly not wanting to be, made fun of or picked on for that. So it wasn't until I got to college that then I found a queer student group, and through some gay friends, then I began the book that really empowered me was Patricia Nell Warren's The Front Runner. And it's not, I guess it's not as well known now, but that was a huge book for me. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. All right. So I've been asking you so many questions, so I got one more, and then maybe we could take questions from other people or
Right.
things. I don't want to totally wear out your batteries. So I'll ask questions up to the point where someone's batteries are done. So where do you envision like the Jake Aqualad story going from here? Now that You Brought Me the Ocean is manifested, I'm sure there are many possibilities. I was wondering, or potentialities, and I was wondering where you thought it goes next.
You know, I've put it out of my mind. I haven't thought about it. I thought about one idea, and then as we were writing this book, things changed in terms of the ending. And so that idea is sort of like, well, that's not going to work. So I've sort of put it out of my mind for now until, we have a contract, and then it'll be like, okay, let's get to work on this.
And then you don't want to give forward the good stuff. I keep being like, is he going to what's his father going to say about his queerness? I don't know. It's weird. Like, I just had so many questions at the end about that. But yeah, I'm sure that that's the case. Well, cool. Well, so I guess maybe we could take questions from viewers. Is that okay? At this point, does that sound like a plan?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I actually have a question real quick, and if anyone,
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a little bit, so I didn't hear that last part that you said.
Oh, Robert just asked if it was okay to take questions from viewers now, if you're okay with that. Yeah, Alex is sort of cutting out at the moment. But what we'll do is, while we're waiting, I don't even know if anyone has any questions, but while we're waiting on folks to comment, I want to make sure that everyone knows what we're talking about. So Alex's book is You Brought Me the Ocean. That's the book that Robert and Alex have been talking about. Julie is the illustrator they've been discussing. And so please check this book out. And you can, of course, get this book at Tubby & Coos, which, of course, is where we want you to get it from if you're watching this event. You can go to our website, tubbyandcoos.com, and click on Place an Order and just type in You Brought Me the Ocean. Here's Alex. He left and came back, so hopefully this is a little bit better now. But You Brought Me the Ocean, tubbyandcoos.com, place an order. You can also get it on our bookshop site if you prefer to just order online and have it shipped directly to you. You can get it from bookshop.org/shop/tubbyandcoos as well. So of course, we want you to buy this book. It's really beautiful. It's beautifully illustrated. It's beautifully written. And hopefully some folks we will have signed book plates as well. So you'll be able to get a signed copy if you purchase one. So I just wanted to mention that as well. And then Robert's book, also just wanted to quickly mention that. I know we didn't talk about it, but Robert wrote a book called TINDERBOX. And it's also really good. It's the untold story of the upstairs lounge fire. And the rise of gay liberation. The upstairs lounge fire was something that happened here in New Orleans. Hopefully most people know what that is. Especially if you're watching this, you should know what that is. But
pointing out, they're pointing out about notoriously unsolved arson fire that took place at a gay bar in 1970s New Orleans, and it claimed 32 lives. It was so swept under the rug that people are still hearing about it. And what's weird about this story is it feels very personal for each people that I've found, for everyone that hears about it. It feels like everyone that happens upon it feels like they're discovering something and surprised. So yeah, thank you for that plug. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a good book. It has sold very well up until now in my store, and I know in other places. So yeah, I've been actually really surprised at how many people haven't known that this is a thing, and they like discover your book and are like, what? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. It's just I feel like everybody should know. So if you don't know that story, you should check that out, and of course check out Alex's story as well.
Yes.
Alex, are you okay? Are you having issues still? And there he went again. I wonder if his internet is sort of going in and out, is what it seems like.
Sometimes happens. I've had that happen to me a couple different times.
I have too. No one's posting any questions anyway, but if I can, hopefully if Alex's thing works, I have a question, Alex.
Sure.
Like to answer it. my question revolves around like working with DC Comics specifically, and what is it like having to take a character that already exists and like put your own spin on it? That's got to be interesting.
Yeah, it was part of what was so exciting was that I just felt so supported by DC that they said, really make this your own. And so that allowed me all sorts of freedom. Then they did say this one stipulation was, give some indication that it's set in the DC universe. And so very early on in the book, in the first, pages where, Jake and Maria are taking a hike, and I was like, what's that in the sky?
I remember that part. Yeah.
And it turns out to be Superman. So that's very early on. It's not really spoiling anything. So looking for ways like that, those creative challenges, then to both use that, set it in the DC universe, but at the same time let the story be my own.
Yeah, I always wondered that about people who write for IPs in general, because they're taking things that sort of universes and characters that already exist, which I have to imagine is very different from creating it from scratch. And so that's always interesting for me to hear how different authors deal with that and write in those universes that they didn't create.
Yeah, so even though DC said, don't worry about, what they've done in previous versions with a character, I found bits and pieces that I really liked about it. So one of them was, setting the story in New Mexico. But then in a previous version, it was set in Silver City. And so much of this book is about, telling the truth, being honest, being true to who you are, that I having been to New Mexico, I knew of this town called Truth or Consequence. And I was like, oh man, that would be even better in Silver City. And so that's how that came about. So I was able to take, these a little bit here and a little bit there from previous versions. And since it's all, DC material, it's like, have at it, be free with it. And so that's how that turned out.
Yeah, it's really cool that they kind of allow you as that much freedom to kind of just go and do, and it's worked out for them. I mean, most everything I've read from like the new DC line of stuff has been really great. And I'll freely admit I have not been a DC fan in the past. I've always been more of a Marvel person than a DC person. Actually, I always thought that Marvel had better heroes and DC had better villains. That's been my sort of opinion the whole time, like growing up reading comics. But this new line of DC Comics, the YA and the middle grade stuff that they're doing, it's so good. I mean, they have one that's like Superman smashes the Klan. I mean, it's so good. It's like, yeah, this is really cool. So I'm really impressed and happy with what DC has been doing with their new stuff and stuff like your book. And they're really going for it. And I think that's cool.
Yeah, it's great to be a part of it.
So we're not getting any questions rolling in, which is fine. Sometimes that happens, but just one more plug again, get Alex's book, You Brought Me the Ocean. It is gorgeous. Look at this cover. The illustrations are just so great too. And this cover is really great, Alex. I love this cover a lot. And so You Brought Me the Ocean. Check that out. Robert's book again is TINDERBOX. Check that out too, because you will learn things about history. Even if you know that this event existed, you'll learn things that you didn't know if you read that book. And also you can find both authors online. Alex is just at alexsanchez.com, which is easy enough to find him. And then Robert is at Word Bobby on, did you say Twitter and Instagram?
All the things, Twitter and Instagram.
All the things. Okay. And then you can sort of follow links from there to get to Robert's website. His last name is hard to spell. I would put it up here, but even so, you may not remember it. So Word Bobby is easy to remember. You can just go and find him there and then get to his other stuff from his social media.
Yep, that's the best way.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for doing this event with us. This was a really interesting conversation. I love the metaphor. As a non-binary person, I love that the illustrator is also a non-binary person. And I loved that the representation in it and the fact that DC is like going in this direction. It's all very exciting. So thank you, Alex, for writing this because it's really great. And thank y'all for being here and celebrating Pride and all of that. I appreciate y'all doing this event with me.
Well, thank you, Candace, and thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Great talking to you.
Yeah, it was so interesting. Let me just say one thing is that always superheroes have been metaphors for queer stuff and like them finding their power and coming into their power. I think it's why I was such drawn to them as you know, growing up as well. I was always drawn to comics and superhero comics. And I think that's a lot of why, because it's a lot of, I have to hide my powers. Nobody can know that I have these because of what will happen. And then you figure it out and then you're like, no, I can do all kinds of stuff with this power. This is great. I think it's so awesome. And I think that really comes out in this graphic novel too. So,
well, thank you.
So yeah, thank y'all. Thanks everyone for watching, whether it's now or later. I always talk about time travel because people may be watching who knows how long from now. So thank you for anyone who watches. And again, please buy books. That's why we're here. That's what we're doing. And I will have signed book plates from Alex. And again, thank you. And we will see y'all next time. Thank you, Robert and Alex. Y'all have a good evening.
Happy Pride. Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.